Sophia's point of view.
The mornings were the quietest part of my day. No gunshots, no hushed threats, no heavy footsteps outside my door. Just the soft humming of the old kettle, the ticking of a wall clock that always ran 5 minutes behind, and the soft rustle of the city waking up outside my apartment window. I stood in the kitchen, barefoot, wearing a thin t-shirt and leggings that had started to stretch more than they used to. My hands moved on their own, cracking eggs into the pan, flipping them before the yolks hardened too much, sprinkling salt with a practiced flick of the wrist. Routine. That's what I clung to now. In another life, I might have still been pulling 12-hour shifts at the hospital, wearing scrubs that smelled like antiseptic and coffee, keeping my head down and heart guarded. But that life had ended the night Matteo Romano opened his eyes and whispered my name like it meant something. Now, everything I did in silence. Carefully. I carried his child. No one knew. Not the nurses I used to work with, not my landlord downstairs. Not even Matteo himself. Not really. He hadn't spoken much since he came back. His body healed slower than his silence, and sometimes I wasn't sure if he'd chosen to stay quiet, or if the weight of everything he'd lost just stole his voice. I turned off the stove and slid the eggs onto a plate. The baby kicked lightly, like it knew food was near. I rested a hand on the curve of my belly, just starting to show beneath the fabric. I know, I murmured. I'm feeding you first. The apartment wasn't big. 1 bedroom, 1 bath, creaky floors and walls thin enough to hear the neighbors argue about rent and broken promises. But it was clean. Safe, for now. In the living room, Matteo sat in his chair by the window, already dressed in the dark clothes he wore like armor. He never spoke first. He never asked for anything, but he always watched. Eggs, I said softly, setting the plate down on the small table by his side. And toast. His eyes flicked to mine, then down to the plate. No words, just a small nod, like that was all he had to give me today. I pulled a chair across from him and sat, resting both hands on my stomach. My coffee had already gone cold, but I didn't care. I sipped it anyway, more out of habit than anything else. You slept through the night, I said. That's good. Still nothing, but his jaw flexed, just once. I'd learned to read the small things. I watched him for a moment. He was still handsome, even now. Rugged jawline, sharp eyes, tattoos curling down his arms like whispers of the man he used to be. But his face was different in the morning light. Tired. Thoughtful. Like he wasn't just living in the past, like he was stuck there. Do you want to go out today? I asked. A slow blink. There's that small market a few blocks down. No one knows us there. He shook his head once. Of course, I didn't push. After breakfast, I cleaned up while he sat in silence. That's how our days went. He never asked where I was going, or what I was thinking. I never brought up the baby, or the fact that I was showing. It hung between us like smoke. Visible, heavy, impossible to ignore. But I didn't need him to speak. Not yet. I just needed him alive. I folded laundry while the radio played softly in the background, some old love song from the 60s, crooning about promises and forever. The irony wasn't lost on me. When the knock came at the door, I froze. 3 quick taps. Then silence. I looked over my shoulder. Matteo's body tensed in the chair. His hand moved toward his side, where a knife was tucked just beneath the waistband of his sweatpants. I'll get it, I whispered. I moved slowly, careful not to let the floorboards creak too much. My heart beat louder than it should have. Every knock felt like a warning now. I opened the door a crack. Just a delivery. A paper bag with groceries I didn't order. I scanned the hallway. Empty. But I knew better than to feel safe. "Matteo," I said quietly, closing the door and locking it tight behind me. "Someone left this?" He didn't move. I placed the bag on the counter, pulled it open. Inside were oranges, fresh bread, and a note. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. "You can't hide forever. He belongs to us." No signature. Just those words, scribbled in block letters with ink smudged like someone wrote it fast or angrily. I turned around. Matteo had already wheeled himself halfway into the kitchen. His eyes locked on mine, and this time, they weren't empty. They were sharp, awake. "They found us," I whispered. He didn't blink, just rolled closer and took the note from my hand. His jaw clenched, knuckles whitening as he crumpled it. And for the first time in weeks, he spoke. "They won't touch you," he said, voice rough like gravel. His hand came up to rest on my stomach, and the baby kicked again, harder this time, as if it hurt him. "I'll make sure of it." Before meeting Matteo, the nights always started the same way, quiet, sterile, a little too cold for comfort. I'd walk into the hospital just after sundown, badge clipped to my pocket, hair pulled back, shoes already aching before the shift even began. The hallways smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee, and the overhead lights buzzed faintly, just enough to give you a headache if you listened too long. But I liked the night shifts. They were calmer. Fewer visitors, less noise, more space to breathe. The chaos came in waves, sure, but there was something steady about working while the rest of the world slept. Like I existed in the quiet between disasters. Nursing wasn't something I dreamed about as a kid. I didn't play with plastic stethoscopes or talk about helping people. It was survival. A job that paid the bills, kept the lights on, and gave me something solid to hold on to when everything else felt like it was slipping away. My mother used to say I had healer's hands, but that was before she got sick. Before I learned that sometimes, no matter how steady your hands are, you still lose people. I walked past the nurse's station, nodding at Marcy, who was already pouring her third cup of coffee. She gave me a tired smile. "You're on surgical overflow tonight," she said, tapping the clipboard. "Room 419 needs vitals checked every hour. And don't go near 424. That's a DOA. Family's still in shock." "Got it," I said, taking the chart. The hours passed slowly. Vitals, meds, paperwork, the occasional crying patient, the rare joke passed between nurses to keep the tension from curling too tight in our chests. I didn't talk much, didn't linger, just worked. Around 2 a.m., I slipped into the break room, craving something warm. The vending machine was half broken as usual, but it gave me a lukewarm tea and a candy bar that tasted like cardboard. I sat by the window, watching the faint glow of the city lights through fogged glass. New York never slept, but up here, 5 floors above the chaos, it looked like it did. Still. Resting. I wondered what my mom would say if she saw me now. Working in silence, eating chocolate at 2 a.m, barely speaking to anyone unless I had to. I wondered if she'd be proud or if she'd tell me to stop surviving and start living. But living felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. I'd been on my own for a while. My father left when I was a kid. My mom passed away a few years back. I had a couple of friends, mostly people I used to work with, but no one close. No one I could call if I broke down in the middle of the night. Maybe that's why I liked the hospital. The structure, the rules, the way things made sense, even when they didn't feel fair. I finished the tea and tossed the cup, heading back toward the surgical wing. That's when I heard the shouting. It wasn't uncommon, not at this hour. patients waking from anesthesia, families arguing over end-of-life decisions. But this was different, deeper, angrier. I turned the corner just in time to see two security guards rush past me. A third nurse followed behind, panic etched into her face. "What happened?" I asked. She shook her head. "Gunshot victim. Unregistered. They're trying to sneak him into the ICU without drawing attention. Marcy said he's got connections." That wasn't unusual either. We got our share of gang-affiliated patients, crooked cops, even the occasional senator's nephew after a bar brawl. But something in the nurse's voice made me pause. "They're moving him to the West Wing," she added. "Private room." I nodded, trying not to think about it too hard. Still, curiosity lingered. I went back to my rounds, checked vitals, and updated charts. But around 3:30 a.m., when the halls were quiet again, I found myself drifting toward the West Wing. I told myself I was just passing through, that I was just curious. Nurses got curious. It didn't mean anything. But when I reached the end of the hall, I saw the door. Room 430. No name on the chart outside. No family waiting. Just one uniformed guard stationed at the door, arms crossed, face blank. "Staff only," he muttered, not looking at me. I held up my badge. "I'm staff." He didn't move. I didn't push it, just nodded and walked away. But the image stayed in my mind. I didn't know then that behind that door was a man they called the Ghost. That he'd been hunted, shot, and barely survived. That I'd be the one to sit beside him when no one else would. I didn't know that fate would stitch our lives together with blood and silence. All I knew in that moment was that something had shifted in the air. Like a storm building far away, too quiet to see but too heavy to ignore. 2 nights passed before I saw the door again. Room 430, still unmarked, still guarded. Rumors travel fast in hospitals, especially during slow night shifts when all we had was caffeine, gossip, and anxiety to keep us going. By the 3rd night, everyone knew someone had pulled strings to keep that man alive, whoever he was. No records, no ID, no next of kin listed. Some said he was a cartel enforcer. Others whispered Mafia. A few swore they'd seen the scars on his chest, deep like they'd been carved with intent. But no one had a name, which meant he was either powerful or cursed. Maybe both. On the 4th night, I clocked in late. An emergency in the ER had pushed back our rotation, and my eyes burned from a lack of sleep. I was supposed to be in general care. Boring, predictable, safe. But Marcy flagged me at the station before I could grab my assignments. "There's been a switch," she said, frowning down at the chart in her hands. "You're covering the West Wing tonight." I paused. "Why?" She gave a tired shrug. "No one else wanted it. They said you're calm, quiet. He won't respond to anyone else. Doctor's orders." My heart thudded once. "Him?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Yeah, 430. Gunshot guy." I didn't ask how she knew he wouldn't respond to anyone. Didn't ask who made the order. Hospitals didn't run on transparency. They ran on hierarchy and unspoken rules. "You don't have to do it," Marcy added, watching me. "We can reshuffle. I just thought you'd handle it better than most." I nodded slowly. "I'll do it." The walk down the hallway felt longer than usual. The buzz of the lights overhead sounded sharper, like they knew I was heading toward something I wouldn't be able to come back from. Room 430. The guard wasn't there this time. Just silence. I knocked once, gently, then pushed the door open. The room was dark, lit only by the soft glow of the monitor screen beside the bed. The blinds were closed, shadows pooling in the corners like smoke. And in the middle of it all, him. He lay motionless, the rise and fall of his chest the only sign he was alive. Tubes ran from his arms, his right hand was bandaged, his torso wrapped tight. But his face sharp lines, strong jaw, a scar just above his left brow, clean and thin like someone had once tried to erase a piece of him. He looked like a statue, like something carved from stone and fire. I stepped closer, quietly, my shoes barely making a sound on the tile floor. "Mr." I glanced down at the chart. Still nothing. "I'm Sophia. I'll be your nurse tonight." No response. I checked his vitals, logged the numbers. Normal, considering the trauma, but the pain meds were still high, which meant he'd likely stay asleep through the shift. I sat beside him, letting the quiet settle again. Most nights I moved quickly between patients, in and out, no lingering, no attachments. But something about the stillness in that room, it held me there, like the air was thicker somehow. I reached for the small cloth and gently dabbed at the sweat on his forehead. His skin was warm, but not feverish. I worked slowly, careful not to disturb the IV. He flinched. Just a twitch. Barely there. But I froze. His eyes fluttered once. I leaned in slightly. "Hey, it's okay. You're in the hospital. You're safe." No words, no movement. Still, the tension in his body shifted, like he could hear me. I stayed for another hour, checking readings, replacing a saline bag. And even though he didn't wake, I kept talking, low and soft. About the hospital, about the shift, about how strange it was that someone so dangerous-looking could look so lost. It felt ridiculous at first, talking to someone who didn't respond, but I'd done it with dying patients before. Elderly ones, those in comas. Sometimes just hearing a voice kept them tethered. So I kept going. When my shift ended, I paused at the door, looked back at the man still lying there in silence. "I'll be back tomorrow night," I whispered. "Try not to die, okay?" He didn't move. But something inside me did. The next few nights were the same. Routine became a ritual. I'd step into room 430, check vitals, change dressings, and talk. Not about big things, just small, stupid ones. The vending machine being broken again, the weather, the fact that Marcy swore the cafeteria was selling recycled soup. Sometimes I'd read to him, whatever book I had in my bag. He never woke up, never moved, but the tension in his shoulders eased a little more each night. And I kept showing up. Maybe because I was lonely, maybe because I was tired of pretending I didn't want someone to finally see me, even if it was a man who hadn't spoken a single word. One night, while replacing the IV drip, I found a folded piece of paper tucked beneath his pillow. My hands hesitated before touching it. I shouldn't have read it. I knew that. But I did. 4 words. "Don't trust the silence." That was it. No name, no explanation. Just a warning. I looked down at him. His face was calm, peaceful, but something about those words stuck with me like a thorn under the skin. Because silence was all we had. There was something different in the air that night. It was subtle, not loud or sudden like the crash of a dropped tray or the screech of rubber soles on tile. Just a shift. I noticed it the moment I stepped onto the floor. The lights flickered for a second before steadying. The hallway felt colder, still sterile, still humming with the same soft buzz, but with a weight behind it, like the walls were holding their breath. Room 430. His door was slightly open. It never was. I slowed, glancing around. No one else seemed to notice. The station was empty. Marcy off shift, the night nurse preoccupied at the end of the hall. I nudged the door open fully and stepped inside. He was awake. Not just fluttering eyelid awake, not halfway between worlds awake. Fully, alertly, quietly awake. He didn't move, but his eyes, dark, unreadable, sharp, followed me as I stepped into the room. My breath caught. He was even more intensely awake than he was unconscious. I didn't speak at first, just watched him watching me. "You're awake," I finally said, soft. His gaze didn't waver. No surprise, no confusion. Just stillness, like he was measuring something invisible between us. "You've been out for a while," I added, trying to sound normal. Calm, like my heart wasn't thudding against my ribs. "We weren't sure you were going to make it." Still, no response. But he blinked once, slow. I walked to the side of the bed, instinct taking over. Checked the monitor, vitals steady. His temperature had dropped back to normal. His breathing was even. "You should try water," I said, reaching for the pitcher. "Your throat's probably like sandpaper." As I poured, I felt his eyes on my hands. Not just watching, studying. I handed him the cup and he took it without a word, fingers brushing mine. His hands were warm, strong. He sipped once, slowly, deliberate, like he was reminding his body how to function again. When he finished, I took the cup back and set it down gently. "You've been in here for 6 days," I said. "No ID, no name, no visitors, just you and a bullet wound." His voice, when it finally came, was low, rough, like gravel scraping steel. "You stayed. 2 words. That's all." But they sank straight through me. "I'm your nurse," I said, because it was easier than admitting I didn't really know why I kept coming back. He didn't smile, didn't soften, but there was something behind his eyes now. Something unreadable but alive. "What's your name?" I asked. A pause. Then, "Matteo." Just that. No last name. No details. I nodded. "Matteo. Okay." He leaned his head back, just slightly, wincing at the movement. "Do you remember what happened?" I asked. "You came in unconscious. Gunshot wound to the shoulder. Clean but deep. You lost a lot of blood." He didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, "It wasn't meant for me." I frowned. "The bullet?" He looked at me. Not through me. At me. Like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. I took it anyway. I didn't know what to say to that. So I stayed quiet. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was dense, heavy with things unspoken. "Do you remember who shot you?" I tried again. Matteo's jaw tightened. "Too many names. Doesn't matter." His voice was a threadbare thing, used sparingly, like a currency he didn't give away freely. "Well," I said, forcing a small smile, "it matters to me. Because if someone's still looking for you, that means you're not safe here." He tilted his head, studying me again. "And you care?" That question, it landed differently. "I'm a nurse," I repeated, slower this time. "It's my job to care." But even I didn't believe that completely. He knew it too. His lips twitched, barely, not quite a smile, but close. "Liar," he said, voice almost amused. I crossed my arms. "And you're one to talk?" Another silence. This one felt warmer. Matteo looked away first, back toward the dark window as if watching the shadows shift outside. "You're not like the others," he murmured. "Other nurses?" "People." I didn't know what that meant, didn't ask. Instead, I checked the IV line, adjusted the flow, let my hands keep busy while my mind reeled. Matteo. He had a name now, a voice, a presence that filled the room and pushed against every rule I told myself to follow. I stayed longer than I should have. I told myself it was just to monitor his vitals, just to keep him stable. But part of me didn't want to leave. Not because of the mystery, not because of the danger, but because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. When I finally turned to go, his voice stopped me. Sophia. It was the way he said it. Soft but certain, like he'd been holding it in. I turned back. Yeah? Be careful. That was it. No explanation, no context. Just a warning, like the note under his pillow. Don't trust the silence. That night I couldn't sleep. Not after what he said. I kept hearing his voice in my head, kept seeing the way his eyes tracked mine, like he knew things, like he saw more than he let on. I didn't tell Marcy he'd spoken, didn't write it in the charts. Some instinct told me to keep it quiet, to protect him, or maybe to protect myself. Either way, I knew the silence between us had changed, and it was only the beginning. The next night didn't leave much room to think. It was barely 10 minutes into my shift when the first call bell went off, then another, then 3 more. Like a domino of chaos had been tipped over the moment I walked in. The unit was short-staffed again, of course. A nurse called in sick, and another got pulled into the trauma wing. That left 4 of us to cover 18 patients, and me stuck floating between post-op and general care. No time to breathe, no time to stop. I like to think I worked well under pressure. I'd learned how to keep my head down, how to move fast but not frantic, how to offer comfort in 30-second increments while managing medication charts in my head. But that night was different. Mr. Donnelly in room 422 had a panic attack and tore out his IV. Blood all over the sheets, his gown soaked. Took 2 nurses and a sedative to calm him down. Mrs. Klein, down the hall, wouldn't stop ringing her buzzer every 5 minutes because her TV remote wasn't working. And someone, I still don't know who, set off the emergency alarm in the staff restroom, triggering a half-floor lockdown for 20 minutes. We were drowning. At one point, I found myself standing in the middle of the hallway with 3 clipboards in my hand, a syringe in my pocket, and not the faintest memory of where I was supposed to go next. I didn't even realize how late it had gotten until I checked the board and saw the time. 2:47 a.m. Matteo. I hadn't been to his room once that night. My feet carried me fast, almost out of habit, down the west corridor. My body was exhausted, but something deeper inside me suddenly alerted me. Room 430. The door was open. The bed was empty. No chart on the door. No monitor hum. Just a freshly changed bed and silence. I froze. Maybe they moved him, I thought. Maybe he got transferred. ICU? Step down? I turned quickly, heading for the nurse's station at the end of the hall. A new face greeted me. Night staff replacement. Hi, I'm looking for the patient in 430, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Matteo, gunshot wound, dark hair, tall. He was here last night. The nurse gave a slow blink, then checked the tablet in front of her. She tapped the screen once. Then again. Her voice was casual, too casual. Yeah, he was discharged earlier tonight. My stomach dropped. What? Yeah, around 11, I think. It was all cleared. Private medical transport. Signed AMA. Against medical advice? I repeated, stunned. She nodded. Doctor couldn't stop him. He said he had his own people waiting. My mouth opened, but I didn't know what to say. He'd left. Just like that. No goodbye, no warning. He hadn't even been strong enough to sit up on his own 48 hours ago. And now he was just gone? I walked back to the room, slow this time. Stood in the doorway. It smelled like bleach, like fresh linen in empty space. The note was gone. The chart too. As if he'd never been there. Except I knew he had. I could still hear his voice. You stayed. Be careful. I sat on the edge of the bed, just for a second. I told myself I was just catching my breath. But part of me was waiting for the door to open again. For the silence to be broken. For him to come back. He didn't. The days passed like clouds, slow, soft, gray. 3 weeks had gone by since Matteo vanished from the hospital without so much as a footprint left behind. I hadn't said his name aloud. Not to Marcy. Not to myself. Not even in the quiet moments between sleep and wake when my thoughts wandered, when memories drifted in like smoke. But he stayed. In my mind. On the way my eyes glanced to room 430, even when it was occupied by someone else. In the silence I'd grown used to hearing again. Life went on. Wake up at 6:30 a.m., toast and coffee, usually cold by the time I remembered to drink it. Shower, loose bun, blue scrubs. Walk down 3 blocks to the bus stop, earbuds in, not because I was listening to music, just so people wouldn't talk to me. Nights were work. Days were quieter. Too quiet. I didn't have many friends. Or any, really. I'd get the occasional text from an old classmate or a shift partner asking if I could cover a shift, or if I'd seen the new HR protocol on chart logging, but no brunch invitations, no Friday night drinks. I told myself I liked it that way. It was easier, cleaner, less risk. Because getting close meant cracks, and cracks meant people seeing parts of you you weren't ready to show. So I kept the walls up, did my job, went home, slept, repeated. Evenings off were the hardest. The silence in my apartment was heavier than the one in the hospital. At least there, the monitors beeped. At least there, someone always needed me. Here, it was just my overwatered plant by the window, a stack of unopened mail, and a leaky faucet that dripped like a ticking clock. I started doing puzzles. First 500 pieces, then 1,000. Not because I liked them, but because it gave me something to finish. Something to focus on. Something to keep my mind from wondering where he was. Or if he was even alive. It was on the 24th day after he left that the call came in. I was clocking out, shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor, hair messy, back aching from 12 hours on my feet. The charge nurse called my name. Sophia? I turned, fingers still gripping my tote. There's a request, she said, walking toward me with a folder. Private assignment, high level. High pay, very hush-hush. My eyebrows lifted. You're giving it to me? She shrugged. They specifically asked for you. That made no sense. I'm not certified for high-risk home care, I reminded her. They don't care. They want you. No explanation. Just this. She handed me the folder. No name. No diagnosis listed on the cover sheet. Just an address. Upstate, gated residence, medical clearance already signed. Is this even legal? I asked, flipping through. Money makes things legal, she said with a half smile. Besides, you've been dragging around like a ghost lately. Maybe the change will do you good. I didn't sleep much that night. I told myself it was nerves, a new assignment, a long drive, but part of me knew. Deep down, something whispered, It's him. It's him. The next morning, a black car picked me up. No driver name, no small talk, just tinted windows, smooth leather seats, and an eerily silent ride past the city lines. The address led to a secluded estate tucked behind tall iron gates and a winding gravel road. No neighbors in sight. Just trees, endless whispering trees. The house, if you could even call it that, was massive. Modern, glass and steel and stone, built like a fortress on a cliff. A woman in a black suit met me at the door. She didn't introduce herself. She just said, "Follow me." I was led through silent halls, past tall walls lined with books and dim light fixtures until we reached a wing that felt separate, detached, removed. She stopped at a door. "Don't ask questions. Do what he needs. Keep your observations to yourself." "Suh." Then she opened the door and left. The room was warm, quiet, dimly lit. At first I didn't see him. The bed was angled toward the window, blinds half closed, the room filled with that same faint scent I remembered from the hospital. Clean linen and something darker underneath. Then he turned his head, and I knew. Matteo. Older than before somehow, not in age but in weight. He looked the same and not the same. Same sharp eyes, same shadowed gaze. But his face was thinner, paler. His body, still. Too still. Blankets covered his lower half, but the wheelchair beside the bed said everything. He didn't speak, didn't smirk. Just watched me like he had the first time, silent, intense. I walked in, slow, set my bag down. "I wasn't told who I'd be caring for," I said softly. His voice was rough, dry. "I didn't want you to know." I swallowed hard. "Why?" He looked away. "Because I'm not the same." I didn't know what to say to that. So I moved closer, checked his vitals, quietly, professionally. Felt the tension in the room like a held breath. "You're not supposed to be here," he murmured after a long pause. And yet, here I am. He didn't argue, didn't explain. I didn't push. There would be time for that. For now, all I knew was this. Matteo wasn't dead, but something inside him was. And I was here to pick up the pieces, whether he wanted me to or not. I stayed in the chair by his bedside longer than I should have. Not because he spoke. He didn't. Not after those first few words. But because I needed to understand the silence between us again. In the hospital, the silence was heavy because it held questions. Here it was something different, tighter, guarded, not curiosity, but control. He didn't look at me again after I checked his vitals. Just stared at the space outside the window like it had something more to offer than I ever could. His legs remained still beneath the blanket. I didn't ask if he could feel them. The chart hadn't said it. Paralysis was only mentioned in one vague line, but the truth was written in his posture, in the slight clench of his jaw, in the way his hands twitched when I adjusted the pillows beneath them. He hated needing help. I recognized that look. I'd seen it on patients before, the strong ones, the proud ones, the ones who'd lost something permanent. But with Matteo, it wasn't just pride, it was grief. And shame. It made the air feel colder than it was. After an hour, I quietly excused myself to explore the suite. My job, if you could call it that, was to care for him, monitor his vitals, assist with transfers, ensure he took the medications laid out on the tray like silent accusations. But none of that was scheduled. There were no set routines, no other staff. It was just him, and now me. The living area was sleek and sterile, but everything was custom, clearly built for someone now limited in movement. Low countertops, ramps, voice-activated lights. Money had made his new prison comfortable. Still a prison. There was a small kitchen off to the side with untouched groceries and unopened bottles of supplements. Who lived here with him? Did anyone? I hadn't seen another soul since entering the house. Just that woman who opened the door, and she hadn't even offered her name. Matteo's world was small now. Contained, calculated, and lonely. I went back to his room after preparing his meds and checking the care schedule, what little there was of it. When I walked in, he finally turned his head toward me again. "You came back," he said quietly. "I didn't leave," I answered, setting the tray down. He watched as I placed each item neatly on the bedside table: water, pills, a protein shake, still cold from the fridge. "I don't need the shake," he muttered. "You lost too much weight. You need it." His jaw flexed. "I don't need anything." "Everyone needs something," I said. Then I looked at him. Really looked at him. Even you. That was the first time I saw it. That flicker of pain behind his eyes. Not physical. Something deeper. Wounded pride. Maybe even regret. But he didn't reply. Just turned away again. I sat beside the bed. Gave him space. I'd learned long ago that healing didn't happen on command. Especially not with men like him. Men who'd been broken by violence, not by accident. Men who saw kindness as a threat. I ended up staying the night. Not because I had to, but because it felt wrong to leave. There was a small guest room near his suite, already prepared. Soft sheets, neutral tones, minimalist furniture. Everything had the feel of something arranged by someone else. Efficient, clean, devoid of warmth. I took a long shower, tied my hair into a braid, and slipped into bed with my phone on silent. There were no messages, no missed calls. I didn't even tell anyone I'd left the city. There was no one to tell. The next few days followed a rhythm, but not a schedule. I checked on Matteo every hour, sometimes more, helped him with transfers from the bed to the chair, monitored the swelling near the scar on his lower spine, gave him space when he needed it, spoke softly, only when necessary. He never said much. Sometimes a nod, sometimes a gruff thank you, sometimes nothing at all. But he didn't ask me to leave. Not once. And I didn't ask him why he requested me. I knew better than to look for answers too soon. It was on the 5th night that something shifted. He'd been staring at the wall again, unmoving, when I sat down beside him after dinner. I didn't speak, just sat. After a while, he said, "Do you ever feel like your life isn't really yours?" I blinked. The question came out of nowhere. Or maybe it had been simmering under the surface the whole time. "I used to," I answered slowly. "And now? Now, I think I just accepted that it is. Even when it feels like a story I didn't write." He looked at me then, not with that cold sharpness from before, but with something tired, human. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "I know. I had control, power. Everything was exactly the way I wanted it. And now?" He gave a bitter laugh. "Now I piss in a bag and need someone to help me put on a shirt." His voice cracked on the last word, so quietly it almost didn't register. I looked at him and saw something new. Not the man in the shadows, not the criminal, not the mystery patient, but the broken human being underneath all of it. "You're still here," I said. "That counts for something." He didn't respond. But that night, when I went to leave the room, he said my name. Just once, just softly. "Sophia." And I paused. It was the first time he'd said it. "Yeah?" I turned, standing in the doorway. Thank you. I didn't say anything back, just nodded, and closed the door gently behind me. The days blurred, slow and heavy like honey trickling through glass. By the end of the second week, I knew his routines better than I knew my own. When he preferred his pills, the temperature he liked his coffee, the exact position his pillows had to be adjusted to, so the pain in his back didn't make him grit his teeth in silence. He never asked. I just noticed. Maybe that's what happens when someone starts to matter without asking permission. They slip into the rhythm of your thoughts, uninvited but impossible to ignore. We still didn't talk much. But the silences between us had changed. They weren't thick with tension anymore. They felt warmer now, quieter in a way that made space instead of filling it. Some evenings he'd nod toward the chair by his bed, and I'd sit, even if there was nothing to say. Sometimes we'd watch the sun drop behind the trees in that slow golden crawl, the shadows on the walls stretching longer with every breath. Other times I'd read. He didn't ask me to, but once I'd opened a book and started reading aloud, softly, without looking at him. He didn't stop me. The next day, the book was already placed on the nightstand when I came in. One night, maybe the 14th or 15th, I lost count, he asked me something different. We'd just finished his therapy stretches. He was more tired than usual, his breathing slow, his head resting back against the pillow. "Sophia," he said, voice raspier than usual. I looked over from where I was logging his chart on the tablet. "Yeah? Why are you still here?" I paused. "Because it's my job." He didn't accept that answer. I could see it in his eyes. "You could have turned this down. It wasn't mandatory." I closed the tablet, set it aside. I guess," I hesitated. "I guess I wanted to see what happened to you." His jaw tightened slightly. "I wanted to know why you disappeared that day," I added, without saying anything. Matteo exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried weight. "I wasn't supposed to be there that long," he murmured. "The hospital. I was moved early. Too much risk." "Risk of what?" His lips pressed into a thin line, but not with anger. With thought. Then he said, "You ask a lot of questions." "You don't answer most of them," I said softly. He gave a ghost of a smile, tired, half-broken, but real. That was when I knew. He was going to tell me something. Maybe not everything, maybe just a crack in the wall, but it was a start. "I grew up in Naples," he began. "Poor part of the city. My father died when I was 10. My mother tried to raise me right. She worked 3 jobs to keep us fed." His eyes didn't meet mine. He was looking at the ceiling. "She didn't know the things I was doing, the people I started running with." He paused. Didn't interrupt. "I was good at numbers, at organization, at seeing people for who they really were, not what they pretended to be." He shifted slightly, adjusting his arm on the blanket. "I climbed fast. Too fast, probably. By the time I was 20, I was running things, not the top, but close. Enough to get noticed, enough to be feared." His voice stayed level, like he was reciting facts from someone else's life. "By 26, I was the second son of a syndicate boss. Blood wasn't needed. Loyalty was thicker anyway." I listened. Every word felt like stepping deeper into a world I'd only heard about in whispers. "There's no freedom in power," he added. "Not the kind I thought, anyway." "What kind did you want?" I asked quietly. He finally looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw something behind his expression that I hadn't seen before. Longing. "Enough to stop looking over my shoulder every time I breathed," he said. That night, he told me about the night of the accident. He didn't go into detail, not names, not places, but the outline was there. A meeting gone wrong. An ambush. Metal and fire. Pain. And then, darkness. I should have died, he said simply. They thought I did. You didn't. I'm not sure that matters. I looked at him for a long moment. You're still here, I said again, softer this time. That has to matter to someone. He didn't respond right away. Then, almost too quietly to hear, maybe it does now. After that night, something shifted again. It was in the way he looked at me when I entered the room. The way his voice softened just slightly when he said my name. And the way he stopped pretending he didn't care if I sat with him. And so, he never reached for me. Never touched me. But it didn't matter. Because the connection between us wasn't built on touches. It was in the stillness we shared. The honesty we didn't ask for but gave anyway. And when I left his room that night, I carried something with me I hadn't before. A weight. But not a burden. More like a truth. One that didn't have a name yet, but lived quietly in the space between my ribs. It crept in slowly, the way feelings always do when you're not ready for them. A glance held too long. A heartbeat quickening when his voice dipped an octave. The way his eyes softened when I handed him something as simple as a cup of water. I didn't plan for it. I didn't want it. But it happened. And every day, the space between the nurse and something more blurred until I couldn't find the clean line anymore. The night before I was supposed to leave, I stood in the hallway outside his room longer than I should have. The house was quieter than usual. No distant whir of machines. No low music playing from the living room. Just silence. The kind that presses on your skin and makes you feel things you've been ignoring. I walked in with my usual softness, notebook in hand. He was awake, sitting upright in the bed, watching the night. The side lamp cast gold shadows over his face. His stubble had grown in a little more. He hadn't shaved in days, and I hadn't reminded him. He didn't glance at me when I entered. Can't sleep? I asked gently. His voice was low. Didn't try. I moved to the chair, sat down. The notebook stayed closed on my lap. I head back tomorrow, I said, quietly. He still didn't look at me. I wasn't sure you'd say anything, he murmured. Would it have mattered? That made him glance my way. There it was again, that flicker of something in his expression that he always shoved back down before it reached the surface. You'll get another nurse, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Probably someone more experienced in long-term recovery. It's for the best. Is that what you want? The question stunned me. I don't know what I want, I admitted, but I know what I can't have. He was silent for a while. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Then he said, "Say goodbye." I swallowed, stood up slowly, walked toward him, and stopped just short of the bed. I kept my voice even, steady. I hope the next time I see you, it won't be because you need someone like me. I hope it's not in a hospital. Not like this. He looked at me, eyes darker than I remembered. And then I whispered, I hope if I ever see you again, it's in a way that has nothing to do with being your nurse. I started to turn. But before I could take a full step, I felt his hand wrap around my wrist. Firm, warm, undeniable. Sophia, he said. My name on his lips sounded different this time. Then he pulled. I didn't resist. The force wasn't hard, but there was urgency in it. I stumbled just slightly forward and caught myself on the edge of the bed with my hand. And that's when he kissed me. His mouth found mine like it had been waiting, burning, for weeks. It wasn't a hesitant kiss. It was raw, deep, careful in a way that made me ache. His hand moved up my back, steady and guiding, even if the rest of him couldn't follow. I climbed onto the bed slowly, straddling his lap, mindful of the brace beneath the covers and the way his legs didn't shift. But his upper body, God, he was strong. His arms held me like nothing about him had changed. And maybe that's what undid me. Not the kiss. Not even the heat behind it. But the way he made me forget, just for a second, that he was broken at all. I cupped his face, kissed him deeper, my breath catching when he pulled me in tighter. He leaned back against the headboard, bringing me with him, letting gravity press our chests together. I felt the strength in his shoulders, his hands exploring my waist, my spine, the small of my back, like he was memorizing every inch he could reach. "I can't feel you there," he whispered against my mouth, voice thick. "But I still want you." My fingers slipped beneath his shirt, tracing the ridges of his abdomen. He winced slightly at a scar near his side, but didn't stop me. Didn't even flinch. I pushed the fabric up slowly, kissed down the center of his chest. Center dinner there. His breath hitched, and his hands gripped my thighs, anchoring me to him. We didn't rush. We moved like people trying to make a memory last. I unbuttoned my top, let it fall beside us. His eyes never left me. Not once. "I've never done this like this," I admitted, voice low. He touched my cheek. "Neither have I." But we figured it out, together. I did the work. I guided the rhythm. He helped where he could, hands on my hips, mouth at my collarbone, breath tangled with mine. Every time I shifted, he adjusted, learning my body as if it was the only part of his he could still feel. I leaned into his neck, whispered things I didn't even know I felt until they came out in gasps. He murmured my name like it was a prayer, over and over, like it was the only thing that reminded him he was still alive. And when I finally collapsed against him, heartbeat thudding against his, he held me as tightly as he could. Neither of us said anything for a long time. The night didn't ask us to. The warmth came before the light. It wrapped around me in soft breaths and a steady heartbeat, rising and falling beneath my cheek. My hand rested on his chest, fingers curled over the edge of one of his tattoos, the ink slightly raised beneath my skin. It was the calmest morning I'd ever known. Chadsin, no alarms, no beeping monitors, no quick steps or sterile smells. Just quiet. Real quiet. His arm was still around me, one strong hand resting on the curve of my waist like it had always belonged there. I was draped half over him, legs tangled with the blanket. His body was firm beneath mine, warm, real, unmoving below the waist, but that didn't make him feel any less whole. I stayed like that for a while, tucked into the safety of his chest, listening to the steady thrum of his breath, to the silence between us, and to the chaos in my heart. 'Cause it didn't make sense, any of it. Not the way he held me like I was something fragile. Not the way I'd slept, deeper than I had in months. And not the way I was staring at a man who had tattoos crawling up his chest and hands like inked shadows, and thinking this feels right. Eventually, I lifted my head. He was still asleep, face angled slightly toward the window, The sunlight hit the sharp lines of his cheekbones, catching the rough stubble along his jaw. He looked younger like that, peaceful even, like something in him had let go, if only for the night. My gaze dropped slowly, across the slope of his shoulders, the tattoos that wrapped around his bicep like armor, the faint scar that cut just above his ribs. Each mark told a story I didn't know yet, but wanted to. I traced the lines of one with my fingertip, memorizing the shape. He didn't stir. I leaned forward, pressing a kiss to his shoulder before I slipped out from under his arm with a practiced gentleness. I found my shirt on the chair, my bra beneath it. I slid them on quietly, smoothing the wrinkles. The room felt colder now without him against me. My jeans were on the floor. I stepped into them slowly, buttoning them with a soft sigh. I was just reaching for my bag when I heard it. A low, raspy voice, rough with sleep. "Are you leaving already?" I turned around, heart catching in my throat. He was awake, eyes half-lidded but watching me. His hair was mussed, a little bit wild. God, he looked good. I tucked a piece of hair behind my ear, trying to find my voice. "Yeah," I said softly. "I have to get to the hospital." He blinked slowly, like he wasn't ready for the morning to start. "Can you stay?" he asked. The simplicity of the question made it feel heavier than it was. I smiled, sad and fond at the same time. "I wish I could, but I have to work." He looked away for a second, like that word, work, meant something more to him than it did to me. "I'll come by after," I added quickly. "Check on you. Make sure no one else makes your coffee too bitter." That earned me a faint grin. "I don't like it sweet," he said. "I know," I whispered. He didn't ask me not to go again, but the way he watched me walk to the door, quiet, unreadable, made something in my chest twist. I paused with my hand on the handle, turned back to him one last time, and he said, "Be careful out there." I nodded. "You too." The air outside felt different, brighter somehow. I walked slowly to my car, still caught in the daze of the night before. My body ached in places I hadn't even realized I could feel. My heart. God, it was doing things I didn't know it was allowed to. The day passed in a blur. Shifts, charts, medications, small talk with patients I couldn't connect with the same way. None of them had Matteo's sharp eyes. None of them knew how to hold silence like it mattered. By the time I clocked out, I was exhausted, but restless. I needed to see him again. Needed to feel him again, even if it was just sitting next to him in that quiet room, sipping lukewarm coffee and pretending the rest of the world didn't exist. I arrived just after sunset. The house looked the same. The light in the bedroom window was on. I parked, grabbed my bag, and made my way to the front door. But then pop, 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 gunshots. Loud, close, too close. My body froze, heart slamming into my ribs like a battering ram. It was coming from the street, maybe the alley beside the house. Shouts, tires screeching, another crack of a shot. I dropped to a crouch behind the stone pillar near the door, fingers trembling, breath locked in my chest. For a moment, all I could think was, not again, not here. And then I heard him. Inside. His voice, sharper, louder than I'd ever heard it. "Sophia!" The front door flung open. I looked up. He was there, braced on the edge of the door frame, chest heaving, arms rigid. He wasn't in the chair. He had pulled himself to stand, gripping the handlebar bolted to the wall like his life depended on it. But his face, it was stricken. Not with pain, with fear. Real, gut-deep fear. And it wasn't for himself. It was for me. Inside, now, he growled. I ran. The door slammed behind me with a force that echoed down the hall. My back hit the wall, breath heaving, heart clawing its way up my throat. Matteo was still gripping the doorframe, jaw clenched, eyes burning. "You okay?" he asked, voice low but sharp. No hesitation, no softness, just urgency. I nodded too fast. I think so." His gaze dragged down my body like he was checking for blood. "You sure?" "Yes," I said, steadier this time. "I didn't get hit, just startled." His shoulders dropped the slightest bit. Relief, not rest. He didn't relax. He never really did. Not when the world outside his walls still wanted a piece of him. "Help me to the chair," he said tightly. I moved fast, sliding it across the floor to where he stood, braced on the wall bar. His legs didn't shift. Frozen in that way I was still getting used to. But his arms, strong and focused, worked with mine to get him lowered safely into the seat. Even then, he didn't let go of my wrist right away. "I told you to be careful," he murmured. "And I tried," I whispered back, eyes locked with his. "But no one warned me the war might follow me to your door." Something in his face cracked, barely, but it was enough, a glimpse of the man underneath the steel. I should have known they'd come closer. "Who?" I asked, my pulse still wild in my throat. "Who was that out there?" He hesitated. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked unsure. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because he didn't want to give it. "Finally," he said, "people I used to own, and people I tried to leave behind." He wheeled into the main room while I locked every bolt I could find on the door behind us. "I thought you said they believed you were dead," I said, following him. "They did, but news travels faster than it used to. One wrong whisper, one surveillance image, and someone connects the dots." "Did you bring me into this?" I asked, before I could stop myself. "Did you know I'd be a target just by showing up here?" His hands flexed on the armrests. "No," he said, "but I knew there'd be risk." "Then why request me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at the flickering fireplace on the far wall. "Because when I was barely alive, your voice made me want to stay," he said finally. "And when I thought I'd lost everything, you were the only thing I didn't want to lose." I swallowed hard. The words felt too big for the room, too real, and I didn't know what to do with them. So I moved. I checked the windows, the back doors, the gates on the side. I tried to calm the shaking in my limbs with action. It worked, a little. When I returned to him, he was waiting in the den, quiet, alert, like a soldier in a place meant for peace. "We should call someone," I said. "I already did," he replied. "I have a man on the inside. If the shooters left tracks, he'll find them." "And then what?" He looked up at me. "Then I make sure they never come close to you again." We didn't sleep that night. I sat beside him on the couch, knees tucked up, watching the shadows on the windows as if they'd move again. Matteo kept his gun close, not hidden, not threatening, just there. And even though I should have been afraid, I wasn't. Not of him. Not anymore. He made tea in silence around 2 a.m., moving through the kitchen with practiced ease. He refused to let me help, even though I could see how much effort it took for him to wheel himself around the counters. But I let him, because I could tell he needed it to do something normal, something human. He handed me the cup, his fingers brushing mine. "You should go back to the city in the morning," he said. I looked up quickly. What? It's not safe for you here. No, I said flatly. Sophia, no. You don't get to pull me in and then push me away when it's inconvenient. His jaw tightened. This isn't about inconvenience, he said. It's about your life. I chose to be here, I reminded him. You didn't force me. You didn't even ask me to stay. You stayed anyway. Exactly. Silence again. But not the empty kind. The heavy, breathing kind. He reached out slowly, took my hand, and threaded his fingers between mine. His grip was firm, warm, real. If anything ever happened to you... I leaned in before he could finish. It won't, I said. The sun rose without warning. No pink streaks, no softness. Just a dull gray light that filtered through the windows, casting everything in tired silver. I hadn't moved from the couch. Matteo had dozed off beside me in the chair sometime after 4, his head tilted back, face calm for once. I watched him for a while. The faint scar above his left eyebrow. The slow rise and fall of his chest. The way his tattooed hand rested on my thigh, even in sleep, like his body still wanted to keep me near. And that's when it really hit me. I had fallen for a man with a past darker than any I'd ever touched. A man with scars that didn't always show on the outside. A man who couldn't walk, but made my world move every time he looked at me. And I didn't regret a single second of it. Not even the danger. Because there was something between us that I couldn't unfeel. By the time the sun was fully up, the street outside looked normal again. No broken glass, no bullet casings, no sirens. Just a quiet road and trees that whispered secrets in the breeze. But nothing felt normal anymore. Not the way Matteo's grip had tightened on mine as he sat in that chair through the night. Not the weight of the pistol he kept resting on his thigh like it was part of him. Not the way he didn't blink when I asked what would have happened if I hadn't crouched behind that pillar fast enough. He just said, "You wouldn't have been the first innocent to die because of me." And I hated how steady he was when he said it. Like he'd already accepted that part of his soul was beyond saving. I made breakfast in the kitchen because I didn't know what else to do. Scrambled eggs, toast, fruit. Something real, something grounding. He rolled in slowly, shirt half-buttoned, hair pushed back like he'd raked his fingers through it too many times. There was a new stillness about him. Not the quiet kind he usually wore, but the kind that simmered underneath, like a fuse waiting for its spark. He looked at the plate I slid in front of him, then up at me. "You don't have to keep playing house with me," he said. "I'm not playing," I replied gently. That silenced him. We ate in silence. And then I asked the question I hadn't let myself say out loud yet. "Who were they?" His jaw tensed before he answered. "People who used to call me boss." "You said they thought you were dead." He nodded. "Then how did they find you?" He looked away, the sunlight catching the side of his face. "Maybe I wanted to be found." That made my stomach twist. "Why would you want that?" "Because hiding forever isn't living," he said simply. "It's rotting, and I'd rather be hunted than forgotten." I set my fork down. "Do you want to go back?" I asked. "No." "Then why are they still chasing you?" He looked at me now, full on, the way he did when he was about to say something he knew I wouldn't like. "Because they want what I left behind, and because I still know where to find it." The rest of the day passed in half movements. I stayed with him, but he didn't say much more. I noticed things I hadn't before, a new phone on the table, burner type. the way his shoulders straightened every time a car passed the front gate, the glances he gave the security cameras on the property line. He wasn't just surviving here. He was preparing. For what? I wasn't sure yet. But I was starting to realize something I hadn't fully accepted before. Matteo wasn't just a man with a dark past. He was still part of it. That night, I sat on the back patio while he wheeled out beside me. It was cold enough that I pulled my sweater tighter around me, and he rolled up close, his shoulder brushing mine. The silence between us had changed again, heavier now. Not distant, but not entirely safe either. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," I said, not knowing why. He looked at me sideways. "That's a dangerous request." "I can handle it." He was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, "I killed my first man when I was 16. The air seemed as still." He didn't look proud. Didn't look ashamed either. He just was. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a war. It was an order. I did it. I washed the blood off my hands. I went home and ate dinner with my mother like nothing happened. He glanced at me, waiting to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. "You think that changes how I see you?" I asked. "I know it should." "But it doesn't," I whispered. And that was the most terrifying part. Because it didn't. Not enough to pull me away. I stayed that night again. We didn't make love, not like before. He held me in bed, arms firm around my waist, lips pressed to my temple. His body didn't need to move to make me feel everything. I rested my head on his shoulder and wondered what it meant to love someone who had blood on their hands and softness in their eyes. And which version of him would win in the end? The next day started quiet. The kind of quiet that felt temporary. We had coffee. He read through a folder someone had dropped off while I was gone, a thick stack of documents with names I didn't recognize. And I didn't ask, because for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to know everything. I just wanted him safe. Wanted us safe. But safety, I was starting to learn, didn't belong in Matteo's world. Because by mid-afternoon, the quiet was shattered again. Not with bullets this time, but with a knock on the door. Sharp, 3 times, followed by silence. Matteo's face went still. He rolled to the entryway without a word. I followed, my heartbeat already ticking higher. He checked the security camera. I couldn't see who was on the screen. But I saw how his hands gripped the wheels of the chair. Like he was about to fight. "Go to the back room," he said quietly. "Matteo. Now." His tone left no room for argument. I stepped back, but before I could turn away, I asked, "Is it them?" His voice was barely a breath. Worse. Then he opened the door. The door opened like a held breath finally let go. I stayed half hidden behind the hallway wall, heart beating harder than it had the night of the gunfire. I didn't know why. Something about the silence that followed that knock felt colder, more surgical, like a knife was already in the room and no one had screamed yet. I couldn't see his face, the visitor, but I saw Matteo's. And that told me everything I needed to know. Not shock, not fear, but something heavier. "Grief?" "I didn't think you'd come," Matteo said, voice quiet and rough. "Of course I came," came the reply, a woman's voice, smooth, low, unapologetic. My stomach dropped. She stepped inside slowly, her heels clicking across the tile like each step was measured. When she turned and faced Matteo fully, I saw her, mid-30s, beautiful, tall, with hair dark as ink and a mouth that looked like it had whispered too many secrets. She didn't look surprised to see him in a wheelchair. She didn't look sad either. She looked disappointed. "Would have been easier if you were dead," she said. And Matteo didn't even flinch. "Depends on who you're asking," he muttered. They stared at each other, years layered in that silence. I couldn't stay back anymore. I stepped out from the hallway. Her eyes landed on me like a threat, unblinking, calculating. "And this is?" she asked. "Sophia," Matteo said before I could speak. "No explanation, just my name." She raised a single eyebrow. "A nurse?" My mouth opened, but he cut in. "She saved my life." Her eyes slid back to me. Of course she did. It wasn't gratitude in her tone. It was a warning, like I'd touched something that wasn't mine. I stood still, unsure what to do. This woman, whoever she was, clearly had history with him, a long one, a deep one. But he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was watching me. And that alone made her posture stiffen. She took a slow walk around the living room, letting her fingers brush the edge of the marble counter. Everything about her felt rehearsed, intentional. "I heard about the attempt," she said. "Messy work. Amateurs." "I handled it," Matteo replied. "Clearly not well enough if I had to come here myself." He exhaled through his nose. "What do you want, Lyanna?" Lyanna. So she had a name. "I want what's left," she said simply. "And what's that?" "Control, territory, loyalty." "You already took that," Matteo replied, voice flat. "I didn't take anything. You left, you disappeared, and now you've got outsiders in your bed, your name on kill lists, and ghosts walking back through your door. You think you can play the victim now?" Her words were sharp, familiar, the kind used between people who had built empires and watched them fall. I felt like I was standing in a fire I hadn't seen lit. Matteo's hand gripped the armrest of his chair. "You came here for more than a scolding," he said. "I came here to remind you," she said, stepping closer, "that nothing you left behind is actually gone, and the longer you pretend otherwise, the more blood there's going to be." She left without looking at me again. Just walked out the same way she came, with the kind of grace only a woman used to power could carry. Matteo didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the door long after it clicked shut. I came to him slowly, touched his shoulder. "She was important to you," I said. He didn't deny it. "She was part of that world?" "She still is." "What does she want from you?" His eyes met mine, tired, brutal, honest. "To remind me who I used to be." Later that night we sat in silence again, but it was different now. He seemed far away. Even when I brushed my hand against his or leaned my head on his shoulder, there was something in his stillness that wasn't there before. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to, because I could feel it, like a storm pressing against the glass. The past was coming for him, and I had no idea how to save him from it this time.
Matteo's point of view.
There are two kinds of pain. The kind that crushes your body, and the kind that settles in your bones, quiet, patient, waiting for the moment you think you're safe. The second one is worse. I've lived with both. I'm living with both now. Sophia was in the kitchen again. Third morning in a row. She moved like she was always meant to be here. Bare feet against marble, sleeves pushed up as she stirred something on the stove, like danger wasn't sitting in the same room watching her. And I was watching her. More than I should have. I hadn't planned on letting her stay this long. After the first night, I thought she'd walk. I thought the gunshots would push her out, that Lyanna's voice would twist the air enough to break whatever fragile thing had started between us. But she didn't leave. She stayed. And the part of me that should have told her to run went quiet. She hummed under her breath as she set a plate down in front of me. Eggs, toast, a few slices of orange. She hadn't eaten yet, again. Her eyes had shadows under them. She looked pale. Tired? I asked. She shrugged. Didn't sleep great. I didn't press, but I noticed the way her hand grazed her stomach briefly when she turned. Something in me paused. No reason, just instinct. Like my body recognized something before my mind could name it. But I shoved it aside. Because the truth is, Sophia's always made me hesitate. She's soft in a way that makes the silence louder. And I don't know how to live in anything quiet for too long. Lyanna's words were still rolling around in my head. The past is a mouth with too many teeth. If you don't feed it, it eats you. That's what she meant by her visit. She wanted me to be reminded. And it worked. Because all I could see now were shadows, old loyalties, dead men who used to call me brother, enemies that smiled when they shook your hand. And in the middle of all that, Sophia. Too good, too real, too breakable. You're quiet today, she said, pulling me out of my thoughts. I looked at her. She was holding her tea mug in both hands, legs tucked under her on the couch across from me. Her face was open, unafraid. Just thinking, I said. Dangerous habit. She smiled a little, but I didn't. I don't know how to keep you safe, I admitted. The smile faded. I didn't ask you to, she said. But that didn't matter. Because I wanted to. And that was worse. That night, I woke before she did. Her head was on my chest, breath warm against my skin. She twitched in her sleep, tiny movements, restless. I wanted to touch her face. Brush the hair from her cheek. Tell her I'm sorry for all the things I've let follow me. But I didn't. Because I've learned, soft things break easiest when you touch them too hard. And I don't know how to hold anything lightly. Morning came slowly. She moved carefully, standing in front of the bathroom mirror for longer than usual. Her hand touched her stomach again. Something was wrong. Or maybe not wrong, just different. I couldn't name it yet, but I would. I always find the truth, one way or another. By mid-afternoon, I had a call waiting for me. Private line, no name, just a voice I hadn't heard in 2 years. Your ghost is coming home, it said. Then silence. I crushed the phone in my hand. Not because I was scared, but because some ghosts don't whisper. They scream. And this one, he knew Sophia's name. I didn't tell her about the call. Not because I wanted to lie. Because I needed time. Time to figure out who was really pulling the strings. Time to move quietly while she still felt safe. Time to decide what part of me I had to become again. It's not fear that kept me silent. It's knowing what happens when someone like me tells the truth. The truth doesn't save people. It stains them. And Sophia? She was already brushing too close to the bloodline I tried to bury. She brought me lunch that afternoon. Pasta. Simple. Comfort food. I ate half of it just to keep her from worrying. She smiled when I finished the plate. See, she said. Not everything has to taste like hospital food. But I wasn't thinking about food. I was thinking about the pressure behind my ribs, the tension in my spine, the part of me that kept hearing that voice over and over again. Your ghost is coming home. He meant Brandon, the man who used to run beside me, the one who knew every safe house I ever built, every name I ever gave, and every person I ever protected, including the ones I'd tried to forget, including her. Sophia was humming again later that night. She didn't know I was watching her from the hallway. She had her back to me, standing at the window with a book in her hands. The sunlight caught the edges of her hair. There was a soft curve in her posture now that hadn't been there weeks ago. Not obvious, but not nothing. She pressed a hand lightly against her abdomen again. That same gesture. Not pain, not anxiety, something else. My thoughts moved faster than I wanted them to. Could she be? No. I shut it down. She would have told me. Wouldn't she? I didn't sleep that night. While she curled beside me in bed, soft and warm and trusting, I lay awake listening to the wind rattle the trees outside. Waiting. Waiting for Brandon. Because he wouldn't send a message unless he was close. And Brandon doesn't knock. By morning, the tension in my chest had calcified into resolve. I got dressed before the sun fully rose, slid into the black long-sleeve shirt she folded for me 2 days ago, the one that still smelled faintly like her shampoo. Loaded the gun she didn't know I kept under the floor panel in the study. By the time she stirred in the bed, I was already by the window, watching. Matteo, she murmured, voice still thick with sleep. I turned. She looked beautiful in my sheets, legs tangled, hair messy, my shirt slipping down one shoulder. It took everything I had not to climb back in with her. But I couldn't. Because the man she fell asleep next to wasn't the one the world was about to force me to become again. I'm okay, I said, quieter than usual. She sat up slowly. And when her hand brushed her lower stomach, absent-minded, instinctive, not even meant for me to see, I couldn't look away. There it was again. Something inside me clenched. A deep, almost impossible thought. Is she carrying my child? I didn't ask. Not yet. Because part of me didn't know what kind of man I needed to be to deserve that answer. Later, I met with one of my old men at the edge of the property. Luca, the last loyal one. He was aging too fast now, eyes tired, hands too stiff for what they used to be good at. He passed me a folder without a word. Inside were photos. Surveillance shots, grainy. Brandon. Tall, clean-cut, always in tailored suits, now with a scar that split his face in a jagged line across the cheekbone. He was in the city. And he wasn't hiding. He's asking around, Luca said. Keeps mentioning your name and a woman. My jaw tensed. He's looking for her, I said. Luca didn't answer. He didn't need to. He knew what it meant when a man like Brandon took interest in someone I was protecting. I can handle him, I said. Can you? Luca asked. You're not the same. No, I agreed. I'm not. And that's why I'll be more dangerous. Because this time, I'm not fighting for territory. I'm fighting for her. When I got back to the house, Sophia was curled on the couch with a blanket draped over her legs, a tea mug half drained beside her. She looked up at me like I was the only thing in the room. You okay? She asked. I nodded. Lie. She reached for my hand, threading our fingers together like it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't pull away. But I didn't speak either. Because if I opened my mouth, I knew what I'd say. Are you pregnant? Is it mine? Do I even deserve that kind of future? Instead, I brought her hand to my mouth and kissed her knuckles. Soft, gentle, like a vow I couldn't speak yet.
Sophia's point of view.
The lie wasn't in what I said. It was in what I didn't. In the quiet nods, the way I smiled through the nausea, the way I pressed my hand to my stomach when I thought he wasn't looking. But he always was, watching me with those unreadable eyes like he already knew. And maybe he did. But we were both waiting, for different reasons. Me for the courage, him for the confirmation. I hadn't taken the test until a week ago. Bought it quietly at a pharmacy 2 towns over. Paid in cash. Waited until Matteo was asleep before locking myself in the bathroom with a trembling hand and a heart beating louder than it ever had. 2 pink lines. No doubt. No delay. No denying it. The room had gone cold around me. I sat on the floor with my knees pulled to my chest, the test sitting on the tile beside me like a detonator. And all I could think was, what now? Now meant silence. Now meant secrets. I told myself I was protecting him, that with everything already coming for him, he didn't need more weight to carry. But the truth was, I was scared. Not of the baby. Not even of what he'd say. I was scared of wanting this, of wanting him, of what it meant to love a man who had blood on his hands and war in his bones. And still, every time he touched me, just a hand brushing mine or a glance across the room, I felt it. The pull, the gravity, the part of me that already knew I'd never walk away. The days passed slowly after that. He grew quieter, more thoughtful. He took more calls, stepped out often. But when he returned, he'd sit beside me without speaking, sometimes letting our fingers rest together like he needed the contact to remind him I was still real. And I gave it to him, without question, because I knew he was preparing for something. I just didn't know what. One morning, I woke before he did. The sunlight had turned his face into sculpture, shadow and light across cheekbones and jaw. He looked younger when he slept. Not like the man in the files or the whispers, just like a man. My man. I reached out slowly, resting a palm against his chest, and whispered, "I'm sorry I haven't told you." He didn't stir, didn't wake. But the guilt inside me did. Later that evening, while he was out with Luca again, I stood in the bedroom with the test in my hand. I'd kept it, stupid maybe, but I needed the proof. I stared at it like it might tell me what to do. Then I slid it into my coat pocket and waited for him to return. He came back around sunset, his jaw tight, movements sharper. He poured himself a drink without speaking, took a long sip, the glass catching the light. "Bad news?" I asked. "No," he said. "Just old news." I didn't press. Not until he sat beside me, one hand resting on his knee, the other holding the edge of his glass like he needed it to stay still. "I need to tell you something," I said. He turned to me slowly. The silence stretched, full of things neither of us were ready for. Then I pulled the test from my pocket and laid it on the table between us. He didn't move, didn't blink, just looked at it, and then at me. For a long time we just stared at each other. Then he said, quietly, "How long have you known?" "About 2 weeks." His jaw clenched, not in anger, but something deeper. Pain, and something else. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because I didn't know how," I whispered, "and because I wasn't sure what it would change." He reached forward slowly and picked up the test. He held it like it was something sacred and terrifying all at once. "It changes everything," he said. Then he looked at me. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't fear. It was something closer to awe. He didn't speak again for a while, but he didn't leave. Didn't look away. Didn't harden like I thought he might. Instead, he reached for me, pulling me gently into his lap, even though it was awkward, even though his legs didn't shift to help. He held me like I was something he didn't think he'd get to have. "Say it again," he whispered against my hair. I closed my eyes and said, "I'm pregnant." He nodded against me, and I felt his heart beating hard through his chest, like maybe he needed this just as badly as I did. He didn't let go of me for a long time. After I told him, after I placed the test on the table like a quiet confession, Matteo just held me, his arms wrapped around my waist, careful and reverent. His breath pressed against my collarbone like it steadied him. He didn't say much. He kissed the top of my head and whispered, "I won't let anything touch you." And for a little while I believed him. I wanted to. Because wrapped in his arms, the world outside didn't exist. Not the blood, not the men hunting him, not the war he kept buried behind those dark eyes. Only us. And the life growing inside me. The morning after, he made breakfast. That alone should have told me something was shifting. He rarely left the bedroom before I did, never touched the kitchen unless I asked. But that morning, he was already by the stove when I came out, sleeves rolled up, a steaming pan of eggs on the burner. His movements were slower than they used to be, controlled, deliberate, but I could feel something simmering underneath. Not panic. Not nerves. Purpose. "Sit," he said without looking at me. I did. And when he slid the plate in front of me, he didn't touch his own, just sat across from me, eyes sharp even in the quiet light. "Did you sleep?" I asked. "Some." His fingers tapped against the rim of his coffee cup. "You're thinking too loudly," I said softly. He gave a ghost of a smile. "I can't afford not to." Later that afternoon, I caught him by the study window, tablet in hand, surveillance footage rolling on the screen. The camera angle showed a stretch of road 2 blocks from our neighborhood. A black car, parked, unmoving. He rewound it, played it again. The same car, different times. He didn't speak, but I felt the room thicken. "They found you," I said. "No," he replied. "They found us." By the 3rd day, it was clear he was preparing for something. The house had changed. I noticed it in the little things, the way drawers closed tighter, locks rechecked, his phone buzzing at strange hours with names I never heard aloud. Luca started showing up again. Twice in one day. And Matteo barely left the room when they spoke anymore. There were no more whispered phone calls in the hallway. No more quiet exits while I slept. Whatever was coming, he knew I needed to see it now. On the 5th morning, he said we were leaving. I was still brushing my teeth half asleep when he rolled into the bathroom doorway, his voice too steady for how early it was. "Get dressed. Pack lightly." I turned, toothbrush still in my hand. "What?" "You can't stay here anymore." The drive felt longer than it probably was. We didn't speak much. I watched his profile in the dim light of the car, his jaw tense, eyes forward, body braced like he expected something to explode. And I held my stomach without thinking, just a small palm pressed to where everything was changing. He noticed. His hand reached over and covered mine. He didn't look, just curled his fingers around mine gently. That simple gesture made something in me ache. The house we arrived at looked like something carved from stone in silence, old and hidden. A man was waiting at the gate, older, pale-eyed, with a slight limp in his walk. He nodded once at Matteo and led us inside without speaking a word. The place was cold, dusty, but secure, and that's what mattered. "Is this yours?" I asked. Matteo nodded. "One of the last safe places no one knows about." He paused before adding, "Except Luca, and now you." I didn't ask how many places he used to have. I didn't want to know how many had already been taken. The night was restless. I couldn't sleep in that bed. Too big, too unfamiliar. The sheets smelled like cedar and metal. The windows were sealed with reinforced glass. Every sound outside felt like a footstep coming closer. And I knew Matteo was feeling the same. He barely left the hallway all night. Just sat there, phone in hand, watching the cameras on loop like if he looked away, we'd disappear. It was around 3 a.m. when I finally walked out to him. "Come to bed," I said softly. He looked up, eyes darker than usual. "I can't," he replied. "You think they'll come tonight?" "No," he said, "but soon." He hesitated, then added, "Brandon's in the city." The name hit like cold water down my spine. He'd never said it before, not to me. But I'd heard it in fragments, in the way Luca's voice dipped, in the way Matteo's hands tightened when his phone lit up. "Who is he?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then finally, someone who once would have died for me. Now he wants to kill me. "Why?" Matteo looked down at his legs. Then at me. "Because I walked away from everything," he said. And I never told him why. I sat beside him on the floor, resting my head against his shoulder. We didn't speak for a while. But when I reached for his hand again, he didn't hesitate. And I knew, even if he couldn't say it yet, that he was afraid. Not of dying, but of losing us before he ever had the chance to live. The next morning, the call came. Luca's voice on the other end. Urgent. "They're moving. 4 of them. Not Brandon, but someone else is leading them. A woman. Cold, quiet, knows where to look." I swallowed. Lyanna. She hadn't been just a warning. She'd been a mark. "Do they know this location?" Matteo asked. "Not yet," Luca said, "but it won't be long. You need to decide. Stay buried or end this." Matteo ended the call without another word. And when he turned to me, I saw it. The shift. No more hiding. No more running. His past was here. And he was ready to become the man who could survive it.
Matteo's point of view.
There's something sharp about silence when it's waiting to be broken. I could feel it sitting in the walls of this house, in the floorboards, in the teeth of the wind rattling through the trees. Something was coming, and I wasn't going to wait for it to knock. Brandon, Lyanna, and the ones who still followed them. This wasn't about power anymore. This was about betrayal. The kind that scars deeper than bullets and silence. The kind that comes from people who once sat at your table, drank your wine, swore to die beside you. They thought I was done. Broken. Lost. Paralyzed and stripped of whatever edge I once had. Let them think it. Let them walk in with smiles. I'd bury them with their mouths still open. I set the trap the way I always used to. Quiet. Patient. 3 moves ahead. Luca met me at the ridge an hour before sunrise. The safe house buzzed with low voltage under the walls, cameras running, perimeter sensors pulsing. But none of that would matter once they stepped foot past the front gate. They wouldn't expect me to be waiting. They'd expect a man still in recovery, a man softened by a woman and an unborn child. They didn't know I'd already chosen my line, and I was done running. "She doesn't know what you're planning," Luca said as we watched the surveillance feed loop again. "She doesn't need to," I said. "She'll figure it out." I didn't answer. Because she would. Of course she would. Sophia was too sharp, too intuitive to miss the change in me. She'd already felt it, seen it in the tension of my shoulders, the way I lingered at doors, the way I pulled her closer at night without saying why. But I wasn't lying to her. I was protecting her. The same way she once protected me when I was too broken to speak. She came into the study while I was reassembling my Glock. Her hair was tied up, face bare, eyes soft but searching. "I made tea," she said, voice light. "Figured you wouldn't ask for it, but you'd drink it if I brought it." I looked at her. My chest tightened. She didn't know how much I needed that softness, how much I needed her, just standing in the doorway like a piece of my future that hadn't been stolen yet. I nodded once. "Thank you." She walked over, set the mug down, and before she left, leaned in and kissed the side of my head. "I don't need protection from you," she whispered, "only with you." Then she walked out. And just like that, the last piece of my hesitation died. The plan wasn't elegant. I'd leave the house open, just enough. A weak security point, a gate that appeared cracked, a line of blind camera footage that fed back clean but fake. Let them come. Let them walk in like hunters. And when they stepped through that second threshold, when they thought the house was vulnerable, when they believed I was alone, that's when the room would go dark. That's when the steel doors would lock. That's when I'd show them the version of me they tried to kill. Luca had doubts. "Are you sure you can still handle this?" he asked. "With your legs like they are?" I loaded the last round into the clip and looked him dead in the eye. "My legs don't pull the trigger," I said. That night, I didn't sleep. Sophia did. She curled beside me, breath even, fingers tucked into the curve of my ribs. I memorized the way she looked in sleep. The way her hand drifted over her stomach like instinct, like love, without needing language. And I promised myself, if I didn't come back from this, they'd never get near her. Not even her name. At 3:12 a.m., the first car arrived. Unmarked, quiet. But I knew the sound of that engine. It was Brandon's choice vehicle back when we used to do business. I watched from the screen as 4 figures stepped out. All black, no hesitation. They moved like they'd done this before. Because they had. The best killers don't rush. They walk like they're invited. I didn't wait for them to reach the front door. I met them in the lower hall, past the foyer, near the steel core room built for interrogation years ago, when this place was still a war nest. They didn't recognize me at first in the shadows. Not until I spoke. "Looking for someone?" They froze. Brandon stepped forward, head tilted. The scar on his cheek looked deeper in the dark. Matteo, he said, voice calm. You look good, for a ghost. I hear you've been looking for me. Not you, he replied. Her. Rage curled slow and deadly in my stomach. You won't touch her, I said. He smiled. I already have. My finger twitched on the trigger, but I didn't fire. Not so soon, because there was something worse than bullets. Knowing I'd planned for this. Knowing I'd see the fear in his eyes before the end. The doors locked behind them with a hiss of metal. The lights cut. And the house, my house, shifted from passive to predator. They were trapped. And I was no longer the one in the wheelchair. I was the one they used to follow. The one they used to fear.
Sophia's point of view.
I woke to silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that follows something. The kind that feels like the air is holding its breath. The room was dark, but not in a gentle early morning way. It was wrong. Too still. Too cold. Matteo wasn't beside me, and neither was his chair. I sat up slowly, my heart already climbing into my throat. The faint scent of metal reached me before anything else. It was subtle, familiar in the way hospitals sometimes are, but it didn't belong here. I stood, pulled on his sweater from the edge of the bed, and stepped into the hallway barefoot. Every instinct in me screamed that something had changed. The cameras by the stairwell blinked red, usually green. The panels on the lower walls had shifted, open maybe, or used. Used for what? I moved quietly, down the stairs, through the dim-lit corridor, past the entryway that now felt less like a home and more like a shell. Then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong to anything in this house. A voice. His voice. Already have. Brandon. Even if I'd never met him, I knew it was him. Because Matteo's voice answered next, and it wasn't the one I knew. It was the one I'd imagined in all the stories whispered about him. Cold. Controlled. Sharp enough to cut flesh from bone. You won't leave this place alive, Matteo said. I froze behind the wall of the service hallway. I shouldn't have been there. I should have stayed upstairs, stayed out of this, like he wanted. But the moment I heard the click of a weapon being cocked, then another, I couldn't breathe. Not until I heard the first shot. It echoed like thunder. 1 second of pure violence that fractured the house's silence into something broken. Then chaos, shouts, footsteps, another shot, then 2 more, sharp, deliberate, closer. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. The baby, the baby, the baby. My thoughts spiraled. Protect, hide, don't move, stay quiet. But my body didn't listen. It moved. Fast. Without reason. Without fear. Only instinct. I took the hidden stairs Luca had shown me once when I asked too many questions. They led down the back way, through the armory hall Matteo swore was sealed, and into the old underground corridor that fed into the far end of the house. I didn't know why I remembered it, but I did. And it brought me just close enough to see what I was never supposed to. 3 men on the floor, 1 still groaning. Blood smeared the wall. Smoke coiled from the muzzle of a gun still warm in Matteo's hand. And Brandon? Standing, breathing, smiling. Until Matteo moved. And then everything changed. It wasn't just a fight. It was a reckoning. Matteo moved like the chair didn't matter, like he'd already planned for every weakness. He used momentum, surprise, rage. He was bleeding from the arm, badly, but didn't slow. He took Brandon down hard, and for a moment, I thought it was over. But Brandon reached for a second gun hidden in his belt, and Matteo fired point blank into his shoulder, then again into his thigh. And when Brandon screamed, Matteo leaned in and whispered something too quiet to hear, then cracked him across the face with the butt of the gun. Blood, teeth, and silence again. My knees hit the floor before I even realized I'd moved. I must have made a sound because Matteo turned sharply. His eyes met mine. And in that moment, the man holding the gun fell away. It was him again. Just him. Bleeding, breathing, looking at me like he'd sinned too loudly and I had heard it all. He dropped the weapon. It hit the ground like punctuation. Then he reached for me, struggling slightly, dragging himself closer, wounded, but still trying to protect me even now. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. I shook my head, eyes already filled. "You're bleeding," I whispered. "So are they. It wasn't a joke." But I laughed anyway, choked, small, frightened, and so in love I could barely breathe. He collapsed against me gently. I caught him as best I could, pressing my hand to his wound, eyes scanning the carnage behind him. Brandon was still alive. But Matteo had made his move, and there was no going back. By the time Luca reached us, everything was red. My hands, the floor, Matteo's jawline. But we were still alive. And in a world like his, that was the only line that mattered. The blood wouldn't stop. No matter how steady I kept my hands, how much pressure I applied, it soaked through the gauze like water through silk. But I didn't flinch. Not when Matteo leaned heavier into me. Not when Luca muttered under his breath and kicked the last groaning man in the hallway. Not even when I looked down and saw my palms painted red. Because this was what I did. Not just as a nurse, but as his. "Get me the kit," I said to Luca, already easing Matteo back into the wheelchair. "Now, the big one, not the travel case." Luca didn't argue. He disappeared down the hall like he knew better than to question the tone in my voice. Matteo's jaw was clenched so tight I thought he might crack a tooth. But he didn't say a word. Not a complaint, not a curse, not a sound. He just watched me with something between pain and reverence. It hurt, like I wasn't just helping him survive. Like I was something holy. I rolled him into the study, away from the bodies, away from the blood-soaked hall, and shut the doors behind us. "Nah, this chair needs to be reinforced," I muttered half to myself. "You've torn the side joint again." He let out the faintest chuckle. "Didn't know you were adding mechanic to your resume." I looked at him sharply. "Don't joke, you're losing blood." His smile faded, and for a moment the weight of what had just happened settled in the space between us. 3 dead men. Brandon, broken but breathing, and Matteo, bleeding for me. When Luca returned with the kit, I took over without hesitation. Laid out everything on the table: gloves, suture thread, sterile pads, alcohol scissors, tape. I'd done this 100 times before. But never on someone I loved. Never on someone who would kiss my stomach like it held his entire future. "Ensnin." "Shirt off," I said gently. He winced as he raised his arms, and I helped him ease it off, watching the fabric stick briefly to the wound on his left shoulder. Gunshot graze, clean through. No bone damage, muscle torn but manageable. I'd seen worse. But not on him. Not like this. His chest was a canvas of old scars, tattoos partially distorted by wounds long since healed. A map of a life lived far from hospitals and safety. I'd always known he came from pain, but seeing it like this was different. It made something in me ache. Cinnamon. I disinfected the wound, ignoring the way his fingers dug into the armrests of the chair. He didn't make a sound, but I saw the sweat at his temple. "You don't have to be a hero," I murmured. "I'm not," he said, voice low. "I'm just trying not to scare you." Too late, I thought. I was already terrified of losing him, of what came next, of how deeply I loved him. Once I started stitching, I focused only on the thread, one loop at a time. In, out, tie off, repeat. The motion steadied me, more than the silence, more than the security, because it reminded me that I could still do something. Still save him, still matter. When I finished, I sat back on my heels and exhaled. The wound was clean, dressed. He'd need antibiotics. Rest. But he'd live. And the moment I told him that, he reached for my wrist. His hand was still trembling. "Come here," he said. I stepped between his knees, unsure whether I needed to collapse or scream or cry. He looked up at me like he'd memorized every part of my face. And then, voice barely a whisper, "You shouldn't have seen that." I had to. "No," he said, eyes dark and full of regret. "I never wanted you to see who I really was." I took his hand and placed it over my stomach. And for the first time, I said it with no hesitation. "You're the father of this child." He blinked, swallowed. "Of course I am." "Then let me decide who you are." He pulled me down into his lap. His arms circled around me gently, careful not to press against the wound, careful like I was made of glass. I rested my head against his shoulder and just breathed. We sat like that for what felt like hours. Not speaking. Just listening to each other exist. Luca knocked quietly a while later. "They're cleaning it up," he said. "The house will be secure by nightfall." I nodded, but I could still hear the echo of that gunshot. Still smell the iron in the air. Still feel the tremor in Matteo's pulse. We were safe for now. But safety was no longer a promise. It was a battle. One Matteo was willing to fight, and one I wasn't going to let him face alone. I thought the worst was over. That the blood on Matteo's shoulder, the gunshots in the hall, the smell of steel in the walls, was the crescendo. But I forgot something. People like Lyanna don't come with noise. They come like ghosts. And I didn't see her until it was too late. The day started slow. Too slow. Matteo insisted I rest. Luca insisted we reinforce the perimeter. I made tea, I didn't drink, checked Matteo's bandages, then stood by the window watching birds pick at the edge of the field. The baby fluttered once, a soft, strange feeling just under my ribs. My fingers instinctively touched the spot. And for the first time, I felt more than fear. I felt hope. Later that evening, Luca handed me a folded note. The paper was thick, elegant, no seal, no handwriting. Just a card inside. One word. Soon. I didn't show Matteo. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I knew what that word would do to him. And I needed him to be calm. That night, I kissed him longer than I meant to. Held his hand while he drifted into sleep, his breathing uneven. The wound on his shoulder freshly cleaned. I waited until I was sure he wouldn't wake. Then I went to the kitchen. I don't know why. Just restlessness. Maybe guilt. Maybe something darker. I poured a glass of water, turned to the window, and froze. There was a shadow at the tree line. Not a man, not a shape. Just something wrong. A movement that didn't belong to the wind. I dropped the glass. It shattered on the floor, and the sound didn't even echo before the power went out. Black. Pitch. A click behind me, soft. Final. I turned. Too late. A woman stood there wrapped in darkness. Lips red, eyes sharp, hair slicked back like ink. She didn't speak, just moved. 1 second I was standing. The next, pain behind my eyes, the sting of a needle, the slow collapse of the room into something silent. When I woke, the world had changed. It wasn't a safe house. This place smelled like mildew and stone, like damp metal and something old, rotting beneath the surface. My wrists were bound, not tight, but enough to remind me someone had practiced this before. There was a chair, a light above me, and Lyanna, sitting across the room like she owned the air. "You're stronger than I thought," she said. Her voice was smooth, almost amused. I didn't speak. She stood, walked slowly around me, not circling, just watching. "You know, I thought Matteo was gone for good. Broken, beaten, dead." She stopped behind me. Her hand rested on my shoulder lightly. "But then I heard about you." I stiffened. "You think he loves you?" she asked. "That he'd choose you over everything he built?" I turned my head, slow. "He already has." Lyanna smiled like I'd given her permission. "Then let's see how far he'll go to get you back." I closed my eyes. Not from fear, but from fury. Because this wasn't just about me. It was about the child growing quietly beneath my skin. The life Matteo and I hadn't even figured out how to protect yet. Lyanna didn't need to pace. She just stood there, still, like a knife waiting for a reason to be used. "I always knew Matteo would get careless one day," she said, voice too calm. "But I never thought it'd be over someone like you." I looked up at her through the haze, dizzy from whatever drug she used, but alert enough to see what she was. Cold. Beautiful. But empty. I stayed silent. "You're prettier than I expected," she continued, eyes flicking over me like she was cataloging flaws. Soft, plain, not his type. I raised my chin slightly. "And yet here I am." Her smile didn't touch her eyes. "You have a mouth on you," she said. "But I suppose that's what he likes now. Women who talk back instead of bleed quietly." She walked toward me, slowly, and leaned down so our faces were nearly level. "You think he loves you?" I didn't blink. "I know he does." Her jaw tensed. Something flickered in her gaze. Not rage, not yet. Just wounded. "I knew Matteo before he pretended to be this half-redeemed man you're warming in your bed," she said. "Back when his name made grown men piss themselves. When he didn't hesitate to snap a neck or order a hit. When he didn't waste time feeling." I stayed still. She kept talking. "I was there when he rose, when he earned every scar you stroke like a poem. And yet, he never looked at me the way he looks at you." That hurt more than she meant it to. Her voice dropped lower. "You want to know what happened the only night I ever had him?" she whispered. "I drugged him." My stomach twisted. "He didn't want me. Not then. Not ever. I had to steal it. And even then he never remembered. Never looked at me like I was anything more than another soldier in his army." She pulled back, disgust rolling off her like perfume. "And then you show up. The nurse, the innocent, the savior," she spat. "And he becomes soft." "Not soft," I whispered. "Stronger." Wrong answer. She slapped me. Hard. My cheek burned, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of a cry. I turned my head away from her and exhaled slowly. My hands still tied, but not helpless. I placed them gently over my belly. It was unconscious, protective, a quiet instinct I couldn't control. But she noticed. She followed my gaze. Her eyes narrowed, then widened, and for the first time since I met her, she looked shocked. "No," she said. I didn't answer. Her eyes flicked between my hands and my face. "No." She took a step back like the truth hit her in the chest. Then her expression twisted into something hideous. "You're pregnant." The silence between us snapped like glass. "You're pregnant with his child," she said, more to herself than me. "He gave you the future that I was never allowed to have." My heart pounded hard enough to make my pulse ache. She moved quickly. Too quickly. She yanked me forward by the hair, dragging me off the chair and onto the cold floor. My hands throbbed against the ropes. My shoulder hit the concrete. "You don't deserve it," she whispered. "You don't deserve him. You don't deserve any of it." Her boot pressed down against my stomach. Not hard, not yet. But the message was clear. Terror choked my throat. "Please," I whispered. "Please don't." She stared down at me, panting now. Emotion warred across her face. Jealousy, grief, longing, rage. "I should kill you," she hissed. "And I still might, but not yet." She took her foot away, just enough to make me sob in relief. "I want him to watch what happens to you." Then she leaned down, her voice in my ear too close. "I want him to feel it, just like I did." Then everything went black again. Not because of the drug this time, but because I passed out from fear.
Matteo's point of view.
I knew she was gone the second I opened my eyes. Not by sound, not by sight, by instinct. The bed was cold. The house was too quiet. And I was already reaching for the gun before my heartbeat even caught up. I rolled through the hall, fast. Faster than I should have. My shoulders screamed, still stiff from the last firefight, but I didn't stop. Kitchen, empty. Stairwell, clear. Front door, still locked from the inside. Luca's voice echoed in the hall as I tore past the entryway. "She's not here." I stopped. Turned. He didn't have to say anything else. I saw it in his face. My mind went black. Not with rage. With clarity. "She was taken?" I asked, calm. Too calm. Luca nodded once. "Power cut just before 4. Cameras looped. No signs of entry. Surgical. Lyanna. Most likely." I stared past him. "She was in the kitchen," I said. "I heard the glass break last night, but thought." "You were drugged too," he interrupted. "Low dose, in your tea." My teeth clenched. "She got that close?" "She planned it for days," Luca said. "Maybe weeks." I closed my eyes, just for a moment. And when I opened them again, the man who ruled the underworld before the bullet, before the paralysis, before Sophia, returned. "Get the car," I said. "Matteo, your legs." "Get the car." The next 2 hours were methodical. We traced the signal from the note she left me. It was planted, meant to distract. But even ghosts leave fingerprints. The GPS tag on her phone had been yanked, but not before a soft ping hit one of our abandoned safe house satellites near the docks. That was her. She wouldn't know it. But the moment she touched her stomach last night, I knew. And if Lyanna saw it, then I didn't have hours. I had minutes. I suited up in silence. Black shirt, Kevlar vest, holster, knife at the back of my belt. 2 sidearms. No guards, no crew, no noise. Just me and Luca. Old school. Because this wasn't a rescue. This was an execution. By the time we reached the docks, the sun was rising, but the sky stayed dark. Perfect. The warehouse at the edge of the old pier sat wide and low, steel rusted, windows blacked out. It looked dead, but the devil knows his kind. And I could smell the blood before I rolled through the open gate. I didn't wait. I aimed. Fired. Twice into the guard near the entrance. One in the chest, one in the mouth. The second man ran. Luca got him first. We entered the building. Smoke, dust, the scent of wet concrete. Then her voice. Faint, muffled, and a sound that stopped my heart completely. A whimper. Not hers, not loud, just soft. Like pain had taken her breath, but not her defiance. I saw red, not metaphorical, real. It colored my vision, flooded my muscles, sharpened every inch of my broken body into a weapon. Lyanna was waiting. She always knew how to stage a scene. Sophia was tied to a chair, barefoot, bruised, but alive. Blood at her temple, lip split. But her eyes locked onto mine the moment I rolled in, and I saw something unbroken. She knew I came. She knew I'd always come. Lyanna stepped forward, gun in hand, smirking. You're late? I didn't answer. Just raised mine. Her eyes flicked down to my legs. How fast I'd moved despite the chair, the vest, the pain. You're not as crippled as they say. No, I said. But you're as predictable as they warned. And then I fired. The bullet grazed her wrist. She dropped the gun. I shot again. Not to kill, to maim. Shoulder, leg, another in the hand that had touched Sophia. Then I rolled forward and pointed the muzzle at her head. Sophia sobbed once, not from fear, from release. I reached her first. Her hands were tied raw, wrists swollen. Her breath hitched when I touched her face. Are you? I'm okay, she whispered. I knew you'd come. I kissed her forehead, and then turned back to the woman on the ground. Lyanna coughed. Blood ran down her chin. You don't have to kill me, she hissed. You've already won. I knelt beside her. Even now, she looked at me like I might offer her forgiveness and understanding. And that scared me more than anything. I carried her out of that building like she was made of light. Luca handled the cleanup behind us. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer praise. He'd known this version of me before. But she hadn't. Not until today. She didn't speak until we reached the car. Even then, her voice came low, almost hollow. I don't want to go home. I turned to her. Her face was blank, her hands in her lap, clasped tight. Her eyes never left the floorboard. Take me somewhere else, she murmured. Somewhere quiet. I didn't question her. Didn't try to convince her. I just nodded. And gave Luca the name of a hotel only old kings and dead men whispered about. By nightfall, we were in a penthouse wrapped in silence. Marble floors, a sky full of city lights, every corner immaculate, untouched by the world we'd just crawled out of. Sophia hadn't said another word since the car. I helped her inside, gently. She didn't look at me. Just walked straight into the master bathroom and closed the door. Not a slam. Not locked. Just closed. I waited an hour. Then 2. I sat in the chair across from the door, hands clasped, the sound of water running, the only proof she was still in there. Eventually, I pushed the door open. Quiet, careful. And found her in the tub, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around them, her hair floating around her like dark silk. She didn't move. Didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on nothing. And it broke something in me I hadn't realized was still whole. I closed the door again. Let her have the space. Even if every second without touching her felt like breathing without lungs. She emerged much later. Hair damp, skin flushed from the hot water. One of the hotel robes wrapped around her. She brushed past me like I wasn't there, ate the food I'd ordered for her without saying a word, then slipped into bed and curled up, her back to the world. I lay beside her, but didn't reach for her. I waited. Until her voice finally cracked the silence. When she stepped on me, she whispered. When Lyanna pressed her boot into my stomach, I couldn't think. Her voice trembled. I kept asking myself, what if I lose the baby? What if he dies because of me? Because I trusted the wrong person? Because I let my guard down? I turned to her slowly, inch by inch. She was staring at the wall, not crying, but her voice was soaked in it. I've never felt fear like that, she said. Not for myself, but for him, for you, for what we're building and what I almost lost. I moved closer then, no longer patient, but still careful. My hand slid over her hip, then around her waist, until I could cradle her from behind. I would burn the world, I said against her shoulder, before I let anyone touch you again. She exhaled, long and shaky. But what if it happens again? She asked. What if loving you means I'm always going to be hunted? I pressed a kiss into her skin. Then I'll make them afraid to come near us, I said. But you already have blood on your hands, she whispered. And now I feel like I do too. No, I said, firmer now. You don't. You loved me. That's not crime. That's a miracle. She turned to face me, eyes rimmed with salt. But they were hers again. Present, a little softer. I don't know how to feel okay after today, she said. You don't have to, I whispered. You just have to let me hold you while you figure it out. She kissed me first. Slow, hesitant, not hungry, not desperate, just real. And when I kissed her back, I didn't reach to pull her closer. I let her do it. Let her climb into my lap, straddle my waist, sink against me as her robe fell to the floor. Her body was warm. But it was the way she held my face in her hands, thumbs tracing the shadows under my eyes, that made it different. She wasn't just choosing me. She was trusting me. With everything she had left. We made love like silence had weight. Slow, deep, without urgency. My hands mapped every inch of her skin with reverence. Her mouth found every scar like it already knew them. Even when I couldn't feel my legs, she made me feel everything else. And when she sank onto me, guiding us together with a sigh so soft it made my chest tighten, I knew this wasn't just about healing. This was about belonging. After, she fell asleep curled on top of me, fingers laced with mine. Heartbeat finally steady. And I knew, no matter what Brandon had left in his arsenal, no matter what ghosts still stalked us, Sophia was mine. And I was hers. To the end.
Sophia's point of view.
The night after Lyanna died, I didn't dream. Not of her face. Not of the blood. Not of the sharp, searing moment when I thought the life inside me might be gone. I just slept, wrapped in Matteo's arms, pressed against his heart like it was my anchor, cradled in silence that finally felt safe. But when the sun crept through the curtain the next morning, I didn't move. Because I wasn't ready to go back to the world that still looked like it belonged to men like her. I laid there for hours, counting the seconds, feeling his fingers brush over my back, light, reassuring. I don't know how he knew not to speak, but he didn't. He just held me. And for once, I let someone else carry the weight of what I couldn't say. Eventually, I rose. I stood beneath the hotel's rainfall shower, warm water streaming down my body, and I stared at my reflection in the fogged mirror. The bruises were starting to yellow at the edges. The cut on my lip had closed, but I didn't feel whole. I didn't feel like the woman who used to pack her bag at 5:30 every morning and clock into a hospital where people trusted her. I felt like someone new, someone harder. When I stepped out of the bathroom wrapped in one of Matteo's shirts, I found him sitting in the armchair, reading an old worn book. He looked up at me, not with concern, with reverence. Like the version of me standing before him now was something he'd waited a lifetime to see. "Come here," he said. I did, without hesitation. We didn't speak much that morning, but I watched the way his hand settled on my stomach when I leaned against him. Gentle, intentional, protective. It was the same hand that had ended Lyanna's life, and it didn't scare me. Not anymore. Because I understand now. This wasn't a man at war with himself. This was a man who would kill to protect peace. And if I was ever going to find a place in his world, I had to stop hiding from the truth of what we were. "I want to go back to the house," I told him softly. He blinked. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Then slower. "I'm not running from what happened, but I'm not letting it own me either." He stood and walked to me, hands settling on either side of my waist. "And if it happens again, then I fight." His eyes darkened, not with fear, but with something close to awe. "You're not the woman I met in that hospital." "No," I whispered, pressing my palm to his chest. "She was waiting for you to wake her up." Back at the house, everything felt sharper. The air, the walls, the echo of my footsteps on the floor. But it didn't haunt me, not like I thought it would. Because I had a purpose now. I wasn't just here for Matteo, or the baby. I was here for myself. I returned to my routines, slower at first, then stronger. I organized Matteo's medications again, re-sterilized the medical kits, refilled the wound care cabinet in the study just in case. When Lucas saw me checking the supply list, he arched a brow. "Back to being the nurse?" I glanced at him. "No, now I'm everything." He didn't smile, but he nodded. A week later, I found myself back in the garden behind the house. The grass had grown a little too long. The air was warmer than before. And, for the first time, I let myself place my hand gently over my stomach and speak aloud to the tiny life beneath my skin. "Your father is not a good man by the world's standards," I said, "but he's mine. And if you ever ask me why I stayed with him," I smiled, "it's because he never once let go of me, even when I tried to disappear." That night, Matteo brought me a small velvet box. It wasn't a ring. Not yet. Inside was a folded piece of paper. I opened it slowly. It was a vow, written by his hand, messy, jagged, honest. "I will never let blood rewrite what we're building. I will never let silence replace your voice. I will never let the world take from you what I was too afraid to protect. I am yours. I didn't cry. I simply folded the paper again, placed it against my heart, and whispered, "Then I'm yours too." It took months to feel normal again. But then, I realized something. Normal was never coming back. And that was okay. Because what we had now was real. After Lyanna died, and Brandon disappeared into silence like the coward he was, Matteo and I returned to the estate. Not the safe house. Not the warehouse. Home. That word didn't scare me anymore. Because we made it ours. We hired people. Good people. Quiet people. A housekeeper named Inez who cooked like she'd fed soldiers for decades. A younger maid, Sofia, who smiled every time she saw me hold my belly. And Matteo's old contact, Franz, retired enforcer, now our security chief, who guarded the grounds like his bones were steel. I didn't feel weak for accepting help. I felt relieved. Matteo had begun to heal too. Not just the scars, not just the stiffness in his legs or tension in his shoulders, but the rage. He started doing exercises I assigned him every morning, stretching, resistance bands, core stabilization, deep leg stimulation. His body was slow to respond at first, but his will never wavered. Every time he stood, even if only for a few seconds, it felt like a small rebellion against fate. And I was proud of him in a way that words could never hold. "You make this look easy," he grunted one afternoon, struggling through a step-up on parallel bars in the courtyard. I stood beside him, arms at the ready but never interfering. "It's not easy," I told him. "You're just that stubborn." He smiled through the sweat. "You like that about me?" "I do." He paused, bracing himself. "Even after everything?" I leaned closer, my lips brushing the edge of his ear. "Especially after everything." I returned to the hospital 6 weeks after we came home. Not because I needed the money. Because I missed it. I missed the halls. The steady rhythm of pulse monitors. The weight of a patient's trust in my hands. People didn't look at me the same. Some whispered. Some stared. But when I stepped into room 11B and met the eyes of a fragile teenage girl crying quietly beneath oxygen tubes, it didn't matter. She smiled when I told her my name. And when I touched her hand, she calmed. I had a purpose here. And no ghost from the past could take that from me. Matteo came to pick me up sometimes. In his chair, when the weather was rough. On his feet, slow and steady, when the sun was out and his strength allowed it. Once, he brought flowers. The nurses whispered. The male doctors stared. And I walked straight into his arms like the queen I never planned to be. The nursery was simple. White, soft gray. A mobile that spun above the crib like quiet music. Matteo painted the ceiling stars himself. Every night, we lay on the floor together, staring at them. "It still feels like this isn't real," I told him once. He reached for my hand. "It's real," he said, "because we bled for it." The pain started like a whisper, a gentle pressure in my back, a cramp that came and went. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was in the kitchen, humming to myself, folding fresh linens with Inez when I felt the second wave. Stronger, longer. My hands stilled. She noticed instantly. Inez's eyes dropped to my belly, then snapped up to meet mine. "You all right, Nina?" I nodded, then immediately doubled over. This time it wasn't a whisper. It was a shout from somewhere inside me, deep and demanding. I grabbed the edge of the table and breathed hard, sweat rising along my spine in seconds. I think it's time." Chaos followed. Matteo was in the study. He rolled out faster than I'd ever seen him move. I heard the urgency in his voice, not panic, but raw focus. Luca called ahead. Franz started the car. Inez shoved a pre-packed bag into my arms. My water broke on the front steps. And by the time we reached the hospital, the contractions were minutes apart. Ella. The room was bright. Too bright. Sterile, cold, humming with energy I wasn't ready for. Matteo stayed at my side the entire time. He held my hand like it was the only thing anchoring him to earth, and I clung to his like I was drowning. The pain was nothing like I imagined. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't poetic. It was raw, bone deep. I felt my body open in a way that didn't feel human. My back arched, sweat poured down my neck, and I screamed so hard I thought my voice would tear apart. But Matteo never let go, even when I begged. "I can't do this," I sobbed. "You can," he said, forehead pressed to mine. "You already are." "I'm scared." "So was I," he whispered. "But look at you. Look at what you're doing. You're the strongest thing I've ever seen." Hours passed. Time blurred. Each contraction made me feel like I was being broken from the inside out. But then came the moment I was told to push. And I did. I pushed with every ounce of fear, love, fury, and pain in my body. I screamed until my throat burned. I thought I would split in two. And just when I thought I couldn't do it anymore, I heard it. A wail. Sharp, high, alive. The doctor said, "You did it, Sophia. He's here." They placed him on my chest, slippery and warm and wailing like he already had something to say about the world. I stared down at this tiny, perfect, screaming soul, and my heart broke open. I cried. I laughed. I felt like my body was no longer mine, only a vessel for something so much more. "He's perfect," I whispered, running my finger down the curve of his cheek. Matteo was crying too. I'd never seen him weep openly. He pressed a kiss to my temple, his voice rough. "He looks like you. He fought like you." Matteo smiled, but his hand trembled slightly as he cupped the baby's head. And I realized, for all his ruthlessness, all his power, this was the moment he surrendered completely. Hey, to us. We named him Noah. It means rest, comfort, peace. Because he was born after the storm. Sometimes I wake in the night to nurse him, and I see Matteo already in the rocking chair, the baby cradled in his arms, murmuring things he only says when he thinks no one is listening. "I'll protect you, I swear it, you and her both." And sometimes he sees me watching. Then he smiles, quiet and unshaken. "You've made me a better man," he whispered. And I always say the same thing back. "No, you chose to become one. Not all stories end with perfection. Some end with peace." And that's what Silent Vows gave us. Not because we were flawless, but because we kept choosing each other through every bruise, every bullet, every doubt. And that vow was never about forever. It was about every day we didn't give up, and we never will.
I didn't grow up knowing what love looked like. Just slammed doors in silence on cold nights. I learned to keep my guard up high, smile wide while I was breaking inside. Then you came in without asking why. Saw the fear I wore behind my eyes. You didn't try to fix or change my pace. You just stayed and gave me space. You're my safe place when I fall apart. You don't run, you hold my heart.